What would you do if a hotel receptionist humiliated you in front of a crowd, just because you didn't look rich enough? Asterisk asterisk. Sandra Bullock never expected a simple hotel check-in to turn into a public spectacle. She walked into the grand lobby of one of the most luxurious hotels in the world, dressed casually, no flashy designer brands, no entourage, just her. She had stayed in places like this before, but this time, something felt different. The receptionist barely looked up at first. But then, as if realizing something, she sneered. "I think you might be lost," the woman said, her voice laced with arrogance. "This hotel is very exclusive." Sandra blinked, confused. "I have a reservation." A scoff. "Are you sure? This isn't exactly the kind of place where just anyone can walk in." A few guests turned to watch, their whispers growing louder. Sandra felt a sinking feeling in her chest. She wasn't just being questioned, she was being judged. But just as she opened her mouth to respond, a voice cut through the tension. A deep, familiar voice. "Is there a problem here?" The entire lobby fell silent. Every head turned toward the entrance. Keanu Reeves had just walked in. And what he did next left everyone absolutely speechless. The moment Keanu Reeves' voice echoed through the grand lobby, the atmosphere shifted. The receptionist, who just moments ago oozed arrogance, stiffened. Conversations around the room came to a halt. Guests who had barely glanced at the scene now turned their full attention to what was unfolding. Sandra Bullock, still standing at the counter, slowly turned to face Keanu. Relief flickered in her eyes, but there was also something else: curiosity. She hadn't expected to see him here. And from the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly, he hadn't expected to walk in on this either. The receptionist, caught off guard, quickly straightened her posture. The smirk that had danced on her lips only seconds ago had vanished. "And no, sir. There's no problem," she stammered, her confidence faltering. Keanu took a step closer. His dark eyes locked onto the receptionist's, unreadable but intense. "Are you sure about that?" His tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it, one that sent a shiver through the air. The young woman swallowed hard. "I was just confirming the guest reservation," she said quickly, suddenly aware of the growing audience. Sandra, who had been quiet until now, exhaled slowly. "That's funny," she said, tilting her head. "Because a moment ago, you seemed pretty certain I didn't belong here." A hush fell over the room. The tension was thick, hanging between them like a storm cloud about to break. Keanu didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to shift the power dynamic. The receptionist forced a laugh, thin and brittle. I must have made a mistake." Keanu's gaze remained locked on her. "Mistakes happen," he said, his voice impossibly steady. "But humiliation? That's a choice." The receptionist's face drained of color. She knew at that moment she had crossed the wrong person. Sandra, ever the professional, gave a small smile. "I assume my reservation is still available?" "Of course," the receptionist blurted out, scrambling to type into her computer. Her fingers shook slightly as she tapped at the keys. I'll get your suite ready immediately." But Keanu wasn't done. He turned to Sandra, his voice softer now. "Are you okay?" She hesitated. It was a simple question, but the weight behind it made her pause. "I'm fine," she said eventually, though her eyes held something unspoken. Keanu didn't press. Instead, he glanced at the receptionist one last time, a silent warning, a reminder. Then, as if nothing had happened, he reached for his pocket and pulled out his phone. Sandra raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" He smirked. "Letting the manager know what kind of service they're providing here." The receptionist's eyes widened in horror. "Wait, please sir, But Keanu had already dialed. And that's when things took an unexpected turn. Because what he uncovered about this hotel was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Keanu's calm demeanor was deceptive. While the receptionist stammered behind the counter, he had already dialed the manager, his finger hovering over the screen of his phone. Sandra watched him closely, still unsure of what he was trying to accomplish. The receptionist, realizing the situation was spiraling out of her control, took a deep breath and tried again to salvage some professionalism. I'll just go get your room keys," she said, her voice shaking as she scurried away. Keanu didn't let her off the hook so easily. "I'm sure your manager will be along shortly to assist." "Thank you." The receptionist froze for a second, her face pale, before she finally nodded and walked away. Sandra, now alone with Keanu in the lobby, turned to face him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not sure what's worse, the receptionist's attitude or the fact that you just made her sweat through her blouse." Keanu smiled back, but there was an unreadable quality in his eyes. It's not just her, Sandra. This whole place is built on secrets. Her smile faltered, but she didn't let it show. What do you mean by that? Before Keanu could respond, a sudden, sharp ping came from his phone. He glanced down at it, his expression changing. I knew it, he muttered. Sandra raised an eyebrow. What's going on? Keanu stepped a little closer, lowering his voice. I just got a message from a friend who works here. Something's off about this hotel, way more than just bad service. Sandra's curiosity piqued. She stepped in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you talking about? Keanu took a deep breath. This hotel has been using a fake reputation for years. They pull strings to ensure celebrities, influencers, and high-profile clients stay here. But behind closed doors, his voice trailed off and his gaze hardened. It's not just the staff that's corrupt. Sandra blinked, processing his words. Are you telling me this place is a scam? Keanu's eyes flicked around the lobby, almost as if checking for anyone eavesdropping. Not just a scam, he said, leaning in. The hotel is connected to a lot of shady business. Fraud, exploitation, and something darker I can't quite put my finger on yet. Sandra's heart raced as she took in his words. She had stayed in some questionable places over the years, but this was something else entirely. Just as she was about to ask him to elaborate, a sharp voice interrupted them. We have a problem. The voice came from behind them, and both Sandra and Keanu turned around to find the manager, tall, impeccably dressed, but with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. The manager's gaze flickered briefly over Sandra before settling on Keanu. I believe we have something to discuss, Mr. Reeves. Would you care to join me in my office? Keanu didn't respond immediately. He just studied the manager for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Sandra, sensing the tension, stepped back slightly. What's going on, Keanu? He didn't take his eyes off the manager. I think we're about to find out. The manager's lips curled into a forced smile. Shall we? Keanu gave a small nod. Lead the way. As the manager turned to walk away, Keanu looked at Sandra. Stay here. Don't go anywhere. Sandra hesitated but nodded. She didn't understand what was happening, but she felt a growing unease in the pit of her stomach. There was more to this story, something far more dangerous than a simple humiliation at the hands of an arrogant receptionist. Keanu followed the manager to the back of the hotel, disappearing around a corner. Sandra waited, her thoughts racing. Minutes passed and her anxiety grew. What was happening back there? What were they hiding? Then, as she paced nervously, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. You shouldn't have trusted him. Keanu Reeves is in deeper than you think. Sandra froze, the blood draining from her face. Was this some kind of warning? And who had sent it? Because what she didn't know was that this message was just the beginning of a much larger conspiracy. One that would change everything. Sandra's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the message on her phone. You shouldn't have trusted him. Keanu Reeves is in deeper than you think. Her fingers tightened around the device. The words felt like ice running through her veins. Someone was watching her. Someone knew what was happening behind the scenes. She immediately looked up, scanning the grand hotel lobby. Everything seemed normal. Guests checking in, staff moving about, a few people sipping cocktails at the bar. But now, every face looked suspicious. Her heart pounded as she tried to make sense of it. Keanu had walked off with the manager less than 5 minutes ago. And now, this? A sinking feeling gripped her stomach. She couldn't just wait here. She needed to find him. Slipping her phone into her pocket, Sandra turned toward the hallway Keanu had disappeared down. The moment she stepped forward, she felt it, an eerie sensation like someone was watching her. Her pulse quickened, but she kept walking. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with doors leading to private offices and meeting rooms. The hotel was designed for luxury, but something about this area felt off. Too quiet. Too secluded. As she neared the end of the corridor, she heard something. A thud. Then voices. Sandra's steps slowed as she approached a heavy wooden door, slightly ajar. Inside, she could hear the manager speaking in a hushed but firm tone. We had an agreement. You weren't supposed to dig deeper. Keanu's voice came next, steady, unshaken. You can't hide what's happening here forever. Sandra's stomach twisted. Keanu knew something. And the manager knew he knew. She edged closer, pressing her back against the wall, careful to stay out of sight. The manager let out a low chuckle. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Always swooping in to save the day. But this is bigger than you. Bigger than your name. And if you don't back off, we'll have to make sure you do. Sandra's breath hitched. Then suddenly, A loud crash from inside the office. Something, or someone, had slammed against the desk. Sandra didn't think. She acted. She pushed open the door just in time to see two men, hotel security, advancing toward Keanu. The manager stood behind them, his expression cold, calculating. Keanu's eyes flicked to Sandra the moment she entered. "Get out of here, Sandra," he warned. But she had already made up her mind. The manager sighed, shaking his head. "I was hoping you wouldn't get involved." Sandra squared her shoulders. "Yeah. Well, too late for that." The security guards moved. Keanu reacted fast, dodging the first man's grab and slamming an elbow into his ribs. The second guard lunged, but Sandra, without thinking, grabbed a heavy glass award from the manager's desk and smashed it over his head. The man stumbled back, dazed. Keanu seized the moment, throwing a hard punch that sent the first guard to the floor. Sandra barely had time to process what had just happened before Keanu grabbed her hand. "We need to go. Now." The manager, still eerily calm despite the chaos, straightened his tie. "You can run, but this doesn't end here." Keanu didn't look back. He pulled Sandra out the door and they sprinted down the hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Keanu, what the hell is going on?" "We don't have time," he muttered, leading her toward an emergency exit. They burst through the door, spilling out into the hotel's private parking area. The night air was cool, but Sandra barely felt it. Her adrenaline was too high. Keanu pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's me. We need to go dark, now." Sandra stared at him, breathless. "Who the hell are you calling?" Keanu turned to her, his face serious. "Someone who can get us out of here before they shut us up for good." Sandra's mind raced. This wasn't just about a rude receptionist. This wasn't just about bad service. This was something bigger. Something dangerous. And she had just been pulled into it. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped her back to reality. More security. More danger. Keanu grabbed her wrist. "Stay close." And with that, they disappeared into the night. But what Sandra didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that they were about to uncover a truth far darker than anything she had imagined. Sandra's heart raced as she and Keanu sprinted through the dimly lit streets behind the hotel. The night was thick with tension, the city's usual hum of life feeling distant, like they were trapped in their own hidden reality. She had no idea where they were going. But Keanu did. He moved with precision, leading her down a narrow alleyway before stopping beside a sleek black car parked in the shadows. The back door swung open. Inside sat a man in a crisp suit, his face barely visible in the darkness. "Get in," he said in a low, authoritative voice. Sandra hesitated, but Keanu didn't. He climbed in, pulling her with him. The door shut and the car sped off into the night. The man exhaled sharply. "I told you to stay out of this, Reeves." Keanu ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched. "I didn't have a choice." Sandra looked between them. "Will someone tell me what the hell is going on?" The man turned to her, his eyes studying her carefully. "Sandra, this hotel, it's a front. A cover-up for something much bigger. You weren't just dealing with a rude receptionist. You walked into something dangerous." Sandra felt a chill creep up her spine. "Dangerous, how?" Keanu sighed. "The hotel is laundering money, high-profile clients, secret deals. The manager? He's just a piece of it. The people above him, they don't play fair." The weight of it settled over her like a heavy fog. "And you knew?" she whispered. Keanu nodded. "I've been investigating it for a while. I was trying to get proof. But now," his voice trailed off as he met her gaze. "Now they know we're onto them." Sandra swallowed hard. She had only come here for a weekend of relaxation. And now she was tangled in something she didn't understand. The man in the suit spoke again. "We can't stay in the city. Not tonight. I have a safe house outside of town." Sandra looked at Keanu. "And then what? We just disappear?" Keanu's face hardened. "No. We expose them." She stared at him. He was serious. Before she could respond, the driver took a sharp turn, and suddenly headlights flooded the car from behind. Sandra twisted in her seat. A black SUV was speeding toward them. "They found us," the man muttered. Keanu clenched his fists. "Hold on." The chase was on. The SUV gained on them, its tires screeching as it weaved through traffic. Sandra gripped the seat, her pulse hammering in her ears. A second vehicle appeared from a side street, cutting them off. They were trapped. The driver cursed under his breath. "We need another route." Crash. The SUV slammed into them from behind. Sandra lurched forward as the impact sent their car skidding across the pavement. Keanu grabbed her arm, steadying her. "Are you okay?" Before she could answer, the second SUV's doors flew open and masked men stepped out. Armed. Sandra's stomach dropped. The man in the suit reached into his jacket. If they take us, we're done. Keanu didn't wait. He shoved the door open and pulled Sandra with him. Run? They bolted. Sandra's legs burned as they tore through the abandoned street, the sound of footsteps and shouts echoing behind them. Up ahead, a warehouse loomed in the darkness. Keanu made a split-second decision. In here? They pushed through the heavy doors, slamming them shut behind them. The air inside was thick with dust and oil. Shadows stretched across the concrete floor, towering metal shelves creating a maze of hiding spots. Keanu pressed Sandra against the wall, holding a finger to his lips. Outside, the footsteps grew louder. Then silence. A terrifying silence. Sandra held her breath, her body trembling. Keanu's eyes locked onto hers, a silent promise that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. Then, bang. The doors burst open. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Sandra squeezed her eyes shut. This was it. Then, a shout. A scuffle. Gunfire erupted. Sandra's eyes flew open just in time to see the masked men dropping one by one, taken down by a second group of men in tactical gear. The suit-clad man from the car emerged from the shadows, lowering his gun. Sandra was shaking. Who are you? The man dusted off his jacket. FBI. Her breath hitched. Keanu exhaled, looking at him. You finally decided to show up? The agent smirked. We had to make sure you were the bait first. Sandra's knees nearly gave out. This was all planned? She turned to Keanu. You used me? Keanu's expression softened. No, Sandra. I was trying to protect you. But when they went after you, I knew it was time to force their hand. She swallowed hard, the betrayal lingering in her chest. But at the same time, she was alive. And the people who had nearly destroyed her life, who had tried to take Keanu down, were now in handcuffs. The reality of it all crashed down on her. She looked at Keanu. Is it over? He sighed. For now. The FBI agents loaded the criminals into vehicles, their radios crackling with updates. Sandra and Keanu stood in the empty warehouse, the adrenaline slowly fading. Then finally, Keanu smiled at her, a real, genuine smile. I owe you dinner for all this. Sandra let out a breathless laugh. You owe me a vacation. He chuckled. Deal? As they walked out of the warehouse, the weight of the night lifted, just a little. But one thing was clear. Sandra Bullock had come to this hotel for a luxury escape. Instead, she had uncovered a dark secret, survived a chase, and stood side by side with Keanu Reeves as they took down a criminal operation. And as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, she had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time she and Keanu found themselves in trouble together. Asterisk, if you were in Sandra's shoes, would you have run, or stayed to fight? Let me know in the comments. Asterisk.